Alright, here we are in Newport. It's a fine fall day. Though it's cloudy and a little bit chilly, I say it's a fine day because it's not windy, and this day we're going to move the greenhouses. Do this twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. This allows us to get a jump on the season in the early part of the year and allows us to extend our season. I had tomatoes in this greenhouse. It's almost November. Just got finally cold enough to frost kill them. So I've cut them all down from the rafters, and I spent the last couple days prepping and planting these beds. Essentially, in the winter, I reshape all the beds that are going to be used, not only in our greenhouses but under our low tunnels. It's a slope 30 degrees. Well, it's 15 degree slope on the beds, and it's a 15 degree slope in the garden naturally from the south-facing slope we have. So it's about 30 degree slope, which is pretty steep, but it does act as another season extender. It does that in a couple ways. One, you can see on the back side of all the beds there's a pretty steep slope. Basically, I'm creating a microclimate, and you can really see this in the winter. The back side of these freezes, and the south-facing slope does not. So I can grow here all winter, hardy crops. I can start carrots early, peas. I plant a lot of spinach and kale and lettuce mix and things of that nature to try to get us through the winter with as much fresh green vegetable as possible. So I've planted these beds. I generally like to do it a little bit sooner, so I have crops already up out of the ground before I move the greenhouses over, but anyone who farms knows there's always 100 things to do. So didn't get to it, but it's still a good idea to move the greenhouses so I don't mess up my crop rotation. So on greenhouse moving day, most of the time is spent actually prepping. It's very quick to move the greenhouses because when I don't have help, as I don't right now, I use this John Deere 3020 with a farmy winch attached to it. You can see I've got it set up quite a distance from where I'm going to stop. You don't want to set up right next to where you are because it will mess your greenhouse up when it gets close to the winch. You need to have quite a distance just for additional leverage and so you don't pull off the tracks. Another thing we do so that I don't pull the greenhouse off the rails, off the tracks that they roll on, is to ensure that the winch is set up so that it's pulling exactly in the center of the greenhouse. Otherwise I'll pull it one way or the other and that moves it off the tracks. So essentially, like I said, a lot of time goes into prepping, and then once we start the tractor up and pull on the greenhouse, it's pretty quick. A lot of the prep work is removing the weights, removing the anchors. There's no foundation on the ends of the mobile greenhouse because it has to be able to roll over the crops, obviously, without destroying what you have or your seed bed. So there's no foundation, which makes the end walls kind of flimsy when you're pulling on them. So what we do is, in order to make the greenhouse as light as possible, I can actually move this by hand with another person. We did that in the spring. One reason is that I made it as light as possible. All the woodwork in the greenhouse comes from the farm. This is cedar from the farm. Cedar is very light and rot resistant. Same here. On the end walls I used board length instead of dimensional lumber to make it lighter, but that also makes it flimsier. So when I want to move it, I just hook up a piece of pretty solid fir and attach it to the ends, and then I make a knot exactly in the center, and I can attach the farming winch to that and pull directly in the center, and that keeps the force from collapsing the walls in. The fir tree keeps the force from pulling the walls together and allows them to pull the greenhouse along this track. So I spent most of the morning, about an hour and a half I'd say, removing all the weights that hold down the plastic, and then clipping up the plastic on the end wall so it doesn't drag along. And since we have such a windy spot, I have to use a lot of anchors. I have anchors, T-posts on the end walls on the corners. I've already moved the ones in front since this is the direction we're going. I also brace off the center of the gable ends with 2x4s that are jammed into the ground. I've taken those out. And I also use some additional anchors inside, which I've taken out. As you can see, the idea here is that the greenhouse moves on those wheels which run on these tracks. So that's pretty much it. As you can see, everything's pretty much dead in here, and it's a lot easier to clean up. Likewise, it's a lot easier to prep beds when there's no greenhouse over it. So we try to do everything beforehand, get the beds all ready, and then once I move the greenhouse off these beds where the tomatoes were this summer, I'll be able to clean this up with no problem. So let's take a break, and I'll start up the tractor and we'll get started.